Justice at the last day of our 2019 convention, but that doesn't stop us from starting like we at the Saturday Action Rally. So let's get started. No justice,
no peace.
No justice,
no peace.
No justice,
no peace.
No justice.
No peace.
What do we want?
Justice.
What do we want?
Justice.
What do we want?
Justice.
When do we want it?
Now.
When do we want it?
Now.
When do we want it?
Now.
Hug the person next to you, tell them you love them.
Never give up.
National Action Network, Change Choir, get them a big hand. Certainly we're happy to be with you another Saturday morning where the action is. And certainly we've had a hugely successful convention, but it is not over. Every day, every room filled over capacity. All of the major candidates for president, Democratic nomination have come. Yesterday we had 8. I thought somebody announced in the middle of the day, run over here. But the idea is the work. All of the whistles and confetti means nothing if we do not leave here and do the work and press on the commitments made, which is why every convention we end a Saturday morning's rally by hearing from our allies in the civil rights movement, giving us an assessment of where they are and what they're doing, and where we all must leave aligned together. Then this afternoon we go into our action workshops at 1 o'clock, criminal justice attorney Michael Hardy, and then our youth on student organizing, Mary Pat Hector, who works out of our Atlanta office but works our national youth move. And the students, they're doing an Afro-punk session, they're doing their sessions on organizing. Let me recognize in the audience this morning our New York City chapter president, Bill Griffin, Buffalo, New York, Janique Curry, Macon, Georgia, Mother Hunt is in the house. South Carolina State Director, Elder James Johnson. Don Tolliver, Tallahassee, Florida. Bishop Bobby Hilton, Cincinnati. And Pennsylvania State Chair Paula Peoples. And as other chapter leaders come in, you pass them to me. Y'all had church late last night. We had Marvin Sapp, who's on our national board, and he was here with his hit, never would have made it. And some of y'all never made it to bed, just struggling in here. I also have been on a personal level, a great convention. For me, this is the first convention my first grandchild's been to. And also, I grew up in the movement. I joined, as Jenny Jones says, under her father, Reverend William Jones and Reverend Jackson, when I was 12. And in 67, 68, a year later, I became youth director in New York chapter. Dr. King was killed that year. So I've literally had a little brother, because my family was all over the place. My little brother was about 3 when I met him. And he has spent this convention with me. It means a lot. I'm trying to push him to go back out very publicly on the public stage on prison reform and recidivism. There's no one that knows policy better and is more articulate, profound, even in elective office today, than my little brother, Jesse Jackson Jr. Stand up, Jesse. I told him, I said, don't be in the, all of us know that there's a lot of mess in what they did with him. Just come on and let's keep on working. We know better. We know better. And we're glad he spent the whole convention with his family. His daddy came yesterday, didn't even know he was here. He'd been here the whole time with us, his daddy and his sister. We just family, we just like that. Let me, before we hear from our national presidents, a brother that has been an activist all of his life, and he's been here at our convention. He has been one of those that understand that you must be as dramatic and passionate as required, but it must be geared toward tangible results. Otherwise, you are just playing with the people, not servicing the people. And if you're not in the zone sometime that people don't understand what you're doing, it's because you're not doing anything. I remember when President Obama had appointed Van Jones, and they went and dug up some old kindergarten stuff he wrote to get him out of that. And then when Trump came in, and for whatever reasons, he was able to convince them to do some things around criminal justice. So he was too left for the right, too right for the left, just right for us. Because somebody has got to get stuff done. And he would call me, and I said, don't worry about it. I've been hit by the left and the right. Don't worry about it. Just keep going. Because some folk don't want to see anything work, because they think their relevance is in everything not working. So some of y'all so left, y'all leave us out. And then some are so to the right, they don't want to do anything. And he has threaded that needle. He called me and said, I want you to go. We supported him in his first step legislation. Hakeem, who all of you knew grew up in Nan, was here yesterday. Hakeem Jeffries and Senator Booker, Cory Booker. But Van was a driving force, had to deal with Jared Kushner and all them. And I said, I think it's a good first step. I will say that. And he said, now I want you to come and go, and we're going to have a celebratory dinner at the White House. I said, no, I can't do that. He said, no, I think it show unity. I said, no, I defend you. Go. We need you at the table. But you know that if I go that the president gonna act up, and then I'm gonna act up, and we gonna forget first step. Let's keep the issue to folk, because me, the president and I come from New York, and we just have that New York thing. He can't help but take a shot at me, and I can't help but shoot back. When Mark take all the bullets out, I just shoot the caps. So rather than y'all confuse this thing, but I want y'all to know that every move he makes, he checks with people that he feels are sincere. And we need somebody that plays different roles. And he's played that with accountability and deliverance. And I wanted him to be here this morning to report to us on First Step and where we go next and what he's working on. Our brother, you know him from CNN, but we know him from activism even before CNN, Brother Van Jones.
Man, it's good to be here, and it's hard not to get emotional when your hero says good things. I'm supposed to talk about something else, but I have to say a few words about Reverend Sharpton. To be here with him now, and people who want to be the leaders of the free world know they can't walk through the White House door before they walk through these doors. That is an extraordinary achievement. I remember when Al Sharpton wasn't just being killed in the media. I remember when they stabbed him and he shed his blood for us on the street. Let's not forget what this brother has done for us. Before there was the internet, it was very hard to know how to fight back. And we got a hold of Go Tell Pharaoh, the book that he wrote in the Bay Area. And my copy of that book, I need to show it to you, is so torn up from us passing it around in Oakland, trying to learn how to fight, how to organize. So while he was getting literally almost killed for us, with no website, he was teaching us how to fight. And so it's much deeper, I think, for my generation. We had him, that's all we had. And to be here and for him to say, even just for him to know my name, is such a big honor. And I just think, just give him a round of applause for what he's done. He's not just a TV celebrity, he's not just a former president of Canada. This man shed his blood for us. So, you know, I'm here to represent the Reform Alliance. It's a new organization that Jay-Z and Meek Mill and about 6 billionaires got together after Meek Mill was so badly treated. And they said they want to get something done. And they were kind enough to give me the opportunity to be the startup CEO to get that off the ground. So I give you greetings on behalf of Meek and Jay-Z and all of those good folks. I also always want to stick up for the Cut 50 movement. Passed 18 bills in the past 18 months on a bipartisan basis, criminal justice reform. Give a round of applause to Cut 50. Well, the smallest winningest little organization in criminal justice as far as I'm concerned. Because of the role that Reverend Sharpton has let me play, negotiating, I've learned some things. And because we're going to go for the rest of the day into actual organizing and planning and preparation, I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't report out to you exactly what I've learned, what I've seen. One thing, because Reverend Sharpton comes out of the Dr. King, Reverend Jackson, Al Sharpton line, they understand strategy is no joke. When you start moving people into action, anything can happen, positive or negative. And if you have the wrong strategy, you can waste the people's time. And the one thing, listen, if I steal your money, you can make some more money. If I steal your purse, you can get another purse. If I waste your time, you can never get that back. And so I don't want to waste your time, and I don't want to waste what I've seen and learned. First of all, we have to be very, very honest about these political parties. I'm on the left side of Pluto, okay? So there's nobody more to my left when it comes to any of these issues, and I have a track record to prove it. But if we're going to be honest, both of these political parties signed off on mass incarceration. Both of these political parties bought their right, the Democrats bought their right to be liberal on every other issue by being quote unquote tough on crime, which meant tough on us, which meant putting our folks in prison. So it took both political parties to get us into this ditch. It will take both political parties to get us out. And therefore, we have to have an assessment of where is this Republican Party on our issue? Where do we have to fight them? Where can we neutralize? Where can we actually work together? And people who say, how can you work with this Republican Party? Let's be very clear, as Reverend pointed out, I know personally how vicious they can be. I used to have a job in the Obama White House, and then I didn't. So nobody has to tell me about Fox or any of these folks. But what I will say is this. I've spent 25 years in criminal justice. I've been in more prisons than I can count as an advocate. I've never met a person behind bars who said to me, Van, I'm in here unjustly, or my sentence is too long. I want to come home. I want to see my family. I want to be able to make a contribution. I don't want to die in here. Van, please help me. But whatever you do, don't talk to any Republicans. I never had that conversation. So, my accountability is to those folks. When folks jump on me on Twitter, I always say, if you're on Twitter calling me a sellout, here's what I know about you. You're not in prison, because they don't have Twitter in prison. So I don't listen to you. I got to listen to the people who are behind bars. And those people need an advocate. And those people need somebody to stand up and somebody to fight. And even with this president, as difficult as it is, I had to look back, as Reverend told me. Frederick Douglass had to sit down with Lincoln, even though we know that Lincoln, for all the good that he did not believe that black people and white people were equal. But Frederick Douglass sat down with Lincoln. Dr. King sat down with LBJ, even though we know LBJ was using the N-word in the White House every day. Nelson Mandela sat down with Botha and de Klerk, his jailers. And not only did he meet with them and talk with them, he even put de Klerk as his vice president, his jailer. He made his vice president to move his agenda forward. Meek Mill did a song with Drake. I mean, listen, anything is possible when you're trying to get something done. And the idea that black folk can't meet with our opponents has no historical place. So here's what I've learned. There's a war going on in that party between the Jeff Sessions, the Stephen Millers, the people who, as best I can tell, are unrepentant in their negative attitudes toward people of color, versus other forces that have a different relationship to some of our causes. I've been able to discover 4 trends, camps, and tendencies in the Republican Party that are worthy of our consideration, and how do we deal with them. One are the fiscal conservatives, who just don't want to raise taxes to build more prisons. They just, are they more mad at taxes or more mad at us? They're more mad at taxes, so they're going to be open to an argument around at least the cost savings. Rick Perry closed 8 prisons in Texas, while Jerry Brown in California was defending in court the overcrowding conditions in California. Governor Deal in Georgia cut the prison population, Republican prison population, quietly in Georgia by about 15–20%, brought the crime rate down and had a cost saving. So there are conservative Republican, Governor Bryant in Mississippi just passed his 2nd criminal justice bill. So there are fiscal conservatives that we can deal with and figure out some common ground with. Fight them on other stuff, but on this issue, might be some common ground. Libertarians who feel like the government is gobbling up too many rights. A lot of white folks don't want folks going to jail for marijuana because they're using marijuana. And so, I mean, to be honest, no point in me being up here dishonest. Exactly, so that's a camp. Rand Paul, Mike Lee are in that camp. And then the Christian conservatives are beginning to buckle under our argument. We're supposed to be Christians. Where's the redemption? Where's the second chances? People leaving a physical prison, going into a social prison, can't get a job, can't rent an apartment, can't get a student loan. Where's the redemption? And you're beginning to see that group move, and now even the black conservatives are speaking up and speaking out. And so there are camps on that side that we need to be able to strategically deal with. And I would be wrong to say that they are all completely captive of the white nationalist, white nativist, white supremacist movement. They are in I think, an unholy alliance with those forces, but there's more going on than meets the eye. And we can take a little bit of space and blow a whole big hole open with the power of our faith. So I want you to be aware of that. Secondly, I want to say that I wouldn't talk to you about something that I hadn't seen some results from. Again, on a bipartisan basis, cut 50 past 18 bills in the past 18 months. Dignity for incarcerated women. Dignity for incarcerated women who get left out of criminal justice all the time has been the sharp edge of our work. And in some states, we've had unanimous Republican and Democratic support for stopping the abuse of women behind bars. So this is something that we can begin to work on and work from. And the First Step Act, though more modest than what we would have gotten under President Obama, has done powerful stuff already. This year alone, there'll be 25,000 people who have shorter sentences because of that one bill. This year alone, there's going to be about 4,000 people who come home from prison early based on those old, outdated crack cocaine sentences. So these are real victories, real help for real people, and I think it's important for us to be aware of that. The last thing I'll say is simply this. Breakdowns can become breakthroughs if we use them right. Breakdowns can become breakthroughs if we use them right. We can't be so triggered and traumatized every time the president tweets that we stop thinking about our people. We can't be so triggered and so traumatized every time there's some nonsense going on in the White House that we forget to think about our people. There are 2 million people who are locked up in prison, and 4 million people caught up on probation and parole every day, no matter who is in the White House. And they deserve our best advocacy, no matter what is happening in the news cycle. And that's a part of why the Reform Alliance is so focused on probation and parole reform. Those 4 million people who are caught up on probation and parole, we forget about. But that is the big revolving door. The hinge on the revolving door back into prison is this hyper-punitive, broken probation and parole system where the parole officers spend more time trying to catch you doing wrong than to help you do right. And that has got to stop. And people keep saying, oh, well, Pookie Nim went back to prison because he blew parole. Shanae Nim went back to prison because she messed up on probation. And you're thinking that Pookie is out there jacking cars. Well, he should go back to prison. He's jacking cars. That's what we hear. Then you look into it. And people are going back to prison for being 10 minutes late to a meeting with their parole officer. And then they lose their home for being 10 minutes late, lose their job for being 10 minutes late, lose their children back to foster care for being 10 minutes late to a meeting. I was 10 minutes late here. I couldn't survive on probation and parole, and neither could you. And so it's a trap, it's a trick, and rather than having, and we have to change that. The Reform Alliance that says, we need your help. We want to change probation and parole from being a trap door into failure into being a springboard to success. And let's help people when they're trying to come home, stay out, rather than figuring out every way to put them back in. That's simple. That's simple. We just need an anti-stupid coalition. It's stupid what we're doing to people now. And breakdowns can become breakthroughs if we let them, if we use them right. This opioid crisis has hurt our feelings. When it was crack, they put us in prison. Now it's opioids, and they want to, talk about health care. That's a breakdown. but it's a breakthrough because now maybe there can be some more empathy for folks in trouble. Let's use the breakdown to get a breakthrough on empathy and get more help for everybody. Trump's tax policy was a breakdown because it gave more to the rich than to us. But Brother Tim Scott, a black Republican, smuggled an opportunity zone line in there that could actually get some help to our community. Let's try to get behind Brother Tim Scott and get some more money into the hood. And lastly, even though the economy, which we really owe Barack Obama for, who saved the economy, even though the economy healing and getting stronger is something that Trump wants to take credit for. And that's a breakdown in truth. The reality is, strategists, the reality is, organizers, the reality is, activists, there's no better time to get folk home from prison than when the economy is growing. When the economy is growing and there are more and more jobs, that's the time to move, to get folk home, because you can say, look, there are jobs when they get home. So every one of these breakdowns, we have a responsibility to look at strategically, cold, clear, smart, deliberate, and use every single thing we can to help our people. Thank you very much.
Van Jones. Van Jones. Certainly we are happy to have heard from him. Let's keep us moving. You that are listening live, WLIB 1190 AM in New York, or watching live Impact Television, we are here all day for the last day session of National Action Network, and it has been a huge success. Let us hear now from our National Civil Rights Organization partners. Let us start with the president, CEO, for the last decade and more of the National Urban League, former mayor of New Orleans, Louisiana, Mark Morier.
Good morning, Nan. It is an honor to be here, to be back at the National Action Network with my friend and brother, Reverend Al Sharpton. Reverend Sharpton has been, and I've shared with you before, embraced me when I came to New York almost 15 years ago to take over the presidency of the National Urban League. And we've had a chance to walk side by side to cover, as he says it, the streets and the suites, to work together in this ever important fight for civil rights and economic empowerment. So I'm proud once again to say thank you, Reverend, and you have had a great week here at NAN. And I'll talk about that in a minute. To Van Jones, we were proud to stand together on the First Step Act. And Van, I told lots of our friends that as we moved a little bit ahead, we were playing political chess. We couldn't play checkers. We needed to make some moves because we had been there with President Obama, all trying to get a criminal justice reform bill through the Congress, and we came right up to the 2-yard line and couldn't punch it through. So in this instance, what we did was put the people who are behind bars and their families first and set aside political considerations in order to pass the First Step Act. And it is the first step, and now we must work on the Next Step Act. Thank you, Van Jones. To my sisters, Kristen Clark, Vanita Gupta, and Janice Mathis, give them a big round of applause. When I became president of the National Urban League, the leadership of historic civil rights organizations were dominated by men. Now we are dominated by sisters. And these sisters are smart and tough and no nonsense, and I get a joy to see them in action. See them in action in public, and as we do, see them in action in private, doing the very, very important work in private meetings and consultations and in conference rooms where there's a lot of hand-to-hand combat going on about policy and legislation and activism. So I want to salute them this morning, give them a warm, warm round of applause, thank them. And in celebrating them, as Reverend said, before I had the great privilege to serve as president of the National Urban League, I was 8 years as mayor of New Orleans, and also served 1 year as president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and told a reporter who interviewed me just 2 days ago on Lori Lightfoot's historic win in Chicago that now I have a hard time finding a brother mayor of a major American city, because you have sisters who are mayors in San Francisco and New Orleans and Atlanta and Charlotte, in Washington, in Baltimore, in Chicago, and Gary. And it is a great point of pride because I have two smart daughters. And in seeing them, I see role models for my daughters. So thank you so very much. And also, I do want to also acknowledge the presence of Jesse Jackson Jr. Jesse Jackson Jr. always provided insight and a helping hand during his years in Congress to help the work of the National Urban League. And I often visited many members of Congress, got lots of commitments and lots of promises. You sort of bank these promises, but then you focus on those who follow through on their word. Jesse Jackson Jr. always followed through on his word. And thank you, brother. It's good to see you today. And also to Gwen Carr, it's good to see you. Ms. Carr, where's Gwen Carr? I know she's here. I love to see your spirit, and we continue to stand with you in your continuing fight for justice. Let me cover a couple of quick things this morning. First, this is about measuring the movement. Several years ago, a little bit less than a decade ago, we were challenged to come to NAN and talk about what we did in the last year that could be measured. The National Urban League has a network of 90 affiliates across the nation. We are unique in the civil rights movement in that we are a provider of direct services to people. I'm proud that in the last year we provided services to 1.7 million people in 90 communities across the nation. What did that include? 150,000 people either came to get financial education services because they wanted to become homeowners, came to us for job training because they wanted a better job in this economy, or came to us to be placed in a job. And that included thousands who were formerly incarcerated, who upon release needed help to get back on their feet so that they could be participants in the economies and the communities together, 150,000. And nearly 500,000 young people, teenagers, middle schoolers, early childhood participants participated in our after-school and education programs across the nation. 10,000 small businesses were provided free services, free consulting services through our network of almost a dozen entrepreneurship centers, including assisting 1,600 people in creating a brand new business in our community. I share that with you because this work isn't going to be on the front page of anybody's newspaper. This work, which is the work, I say, in the hot kitchen of civil rights, behind the scenes, where we're working with families and people one-on-one to help them escape poverty, to find financial independence and self-sustainability and economic self-sufficiency. But I want you to know that work. I want you to understand that civil rights in the 21st century is broad. It's activism. It's public policy. It is work in the area of corporate diversity. It includes the effort to help people who are elected to advance public policies that are responsive to our community. It is broad in America, and the 21st civil rights movement, 21st century civil rights movement is alive, and it is well, and it is strong, and we're up against some powerful forces. Two other things. We'll release in less than a month our State of Black America report. This year, its focus is on the black vote and on political participation. Something important has happened here at the National Action Network Convention. The message that this convention sends, with all of these candidates coming here and embracing things like reparations and talking about health care and using terminology about equity, is that finally we may be at the beginning where the black community is neither going to be ignored nor taken for granted. Neither ignored or taken for granted. But coming to NAN for those candidates cannot be a check the box, if you will, exercise. It has to be the beginning of engaging with us on an ongoing basis. Let me tell you about the power you have. 25%, 6 or 7% of all Democratic primary voters in 2016 were African American. It's the largest block, if you will, the largest contained community in those that will cast ballots in the Democratic primaries. I said to the press, anybody who understood those numbers who is running for office and ignores the black community should get a PhD in being a fool. Because numbers do count. But let me tell you what we face. We face a vicious, diabolical, all-out assault on our right to vote. And it is a three-legged stool. On one hand, there's the United States Supreme Court. And that court, in the last decade or so, has handed down at least 3 decisions which are designed to undercut the growing influence and power of communities of color. The so-called Citizens United case, which has allowed wealthy Americans to flood the political process with unlimited sums of money, is one. The Shelby v. Holder decision, which ironically, on the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, struck down a key provision of the Voting Rights Act, was an absolute insult to the work of those who fought for the Voting Rights Act in the 1960s, and the success of the Voting Rights Act in protecting the right to vote and pushing back against vote dilution was the second decision. And the third was a decision most recently which reaffirmed the ability of states to purge voters, as they did in Ohio, when they simply had not voted in the last 2 years. So the Supreme Court is one leg of the stool. The second leg of the stool are state legislatures across the nation, 40 strong, who have introduced various pieces of legislation to make it more difficult for people to vote. Canceling early voting on Sundays, coming up with phony voter ID requirements, making it more difficult for community-based organizations to register people to vote, consolidating polling places. Well, I heard Stacey Abrams at this podium talk about how election officials in Florida used every scheme and every scam to try to rip that election away from her. State legislatures are the second leg of the stool. The third leg of the stool is many, many, many thousands of miles away. That's the leg of Russian interference. Now, hear me. The Senate Intelligence Committee, organizations like the German Marshall Fund, and we will talk about this and release this information in our report, uncovered that the driving, strategic, animating, energizing intent of Russian interference was to exploit racial divisions in the United States and suppress the African American vote. So what did it include? It included the creation of fake identities. Fake identities who posed online as civil rights activists, as Black Lives Matter activists. There were photos of them and profiles of them. And they took the legitimate good name of Black Lives Matter and began filtering the internet through Instagram and other devices with messages saying, do not vote, with messages saying, don't vote for this one, with messages which said, leaders are sellouts. Their activity was greater than any legitimate activity using the Black Lives Matter hashtag. This is what happened. This is what we're up against. We're up against a diabolical, sophisticated, carefully orchestrated effort to suppress our votes. First of all, we must be aware of it. Second of all, we must call the question on elected officials, those who run, those who administer elections processes, those in law enforcement, that we will not tolerate it. We cannot allow, on our watch in the 21st century, a repeat of what happened in the 1880s and the 1890s, when our people, after making progress during Reconstruction, saw it completely snatched away with the rise of segregation, Jim Crow, and Plessy versus Ferguson. So this right to vote, this protection of democracy, we must recognize it is under assault in America today, and we have to fight back against it. I'm going to talk about one last issue, and that is the upcoming census, the 2020 census, which is a year out. This year's census is going to provide to each of us with 4 options to participate. There'll be an online option, there'll be an option via telephone, there'll be the traditional paper form option, and then there will be what's called the enumerator option. That's where someone knocks on your door. In 2010, we had a fairly successful census. President Obama took office in 2009. He increased funding for the census. I had the privilege to be selected as chair of the Census Advisory Committee. We, if you will, re-energized the advertising in Black and brown communities and put more money behind it. Notwithstanding that, we still had an undercount of black people. And we had an undercount of brown people. And one of the biggest components of the undercount, hear me, was the undercount of children. The undercount of children. I feel we can do something about that. Why is that the case? People filling out a form or talking to the enumerator and not identifying the fact that they have children in the home, or not identifying that a child may be away at college but still living here in the home. We have got to focus on this, but we've also got to demand that the Census Bureau include this in its public education campaign to remind people. Secondly, in our community, we have a lot of multiple families living under one roof. So if you get a census form and your mother lives with you, your sister lives with you, you have to place them on the form. They're not going to get a second form. So we've got to educate ourselves so that we can do everything that we can do to ensure a complete and full count, while at the same time keeping pressure on census. I'm concerned about this census. The last census was conducted when Barack Obama was president. The previous census was conducted when Bill Clinton was president. The 1990 census, which was a census with a large undercount, was conducted when the first Bush was president. Already, the Census Bureau has, one, sought to add a citizenship question at the last minute without even following their own procedures, when their own research says it's going to discourage people from voting. Get that question off the census form. We want the courts to do it. Number two, the Census Bureau has cut in half the number of local census offices that they are going to stand up in the 2020 census. Those local census offices are places where you could go to pick up a form, drop off a form, get assistance, and out of which these enumerators will indeed work. Number three, we have great concerns about whether the advertising campaign, which is the largest advertising campaign that will be conducted in the United States, is going to focus on hard-to-count populations and on our community. So we have work to do. So in closing, and in sum, we have to focus on today and tomorrow. We know that we are up against some sinister forces, some difficult times, and some diabolical forces. But we have to be empowered. We can't become caught watching Twitter, watching TV, cursing the TV screen, spending the whole day so mad. We got to channel that energy into participating, into voting, into participating in the census. So we're going to work together with NAN, all of the other civil rights organizations. Our goal as a community is that we want the highest voter turnout in the primaries and in the general election in American history. We got to set a goal for ourselves. Our power comes through the ballot. To those who said, and I heard them way back in 2000, they said it didn't matter who won. In 2016, some said, well, it really doesn't matter who won. Don't waste your time voting. Our power cannot be surrendered by disuse. We have to fight voter suppression, and we have to battle voter self-suppression so that we participate. So thank you, National Action Network. God bless you, and I'll see you again.
Mark Muriel. Let me say, and I'm going to bring Vanita Gupta up next, and I want our live audience to hear all of our leaders. And I want to say a couple of things on what Mark has said, because it's so important as we work together. Yesterday we were electrified by Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC. And I was saying to her, the census is this important. They have already said New York State, for example, may lose a congressional seat. If we are undercut, you know where they'll take that seat from. So this is as serious as it gets. So as we work with the Urban League and others on the count, everybody talking about what are we going to do? One is we've got to do the count. Van Jones talks about how we're in the lineage of Dr. King, Reverend Jackson and all. One of the things that Dr. King did is he went north to Chicago, where Reverend Jackson was born in Greenville, picked up the ball and expanded in the north, and part of what he expanded was Brooklyn. I was born in that chapter. I was one of the first ones born in the north. I never sat in the back of the bus. I don't know nothing about no white water fountain, none of that. My mother did. I know New York bigots. We were not told sit in the back of the bus. We were not told you couldn't go to water fountain, but we knew the neighborhoods we couldn't go in. And we knew the schools we couldn't attend, Ocean Hill and all. That's what I grew up in. Now, going right to Van's point, the prototype of that was not Bull Connor in the South. It was guys like Trump in the North. Don't forget, Trump grew up about a mile and a half from Howard Beach. And the only New York racial issue in 30 years he ever took a position on was he called for the execution of the Central Park Five. So I know the pinstripe manicured northern guys. And that's what we've got to fight with on this census stuff. Now, we need the guys like Van to deal with them. You know, it's like good cop, bad cop. And I told this, and I'm going to Vanita, we've got to be smart enough where they say, now, you know Sharpton's crazy, but you'd rather deal with me. And I'll be crazy for you, as long as we gonna get folk out of jail. I ain't got no problem with that. And that's what they do every day. I remember that we was having some kind of demonstration, Christian, I think it was the Day of Outrage. And we were out there getting ready to go to jail. We decided on civil disobedience, and we gonna fill the jails, close down the city. And I made a speech. I jumped on the back of a car, made a speech to get everybody inspired to go to jail with me. We went to jail, brought us down to 100 Center Street, and put us in the bullpen, wait to go see the judge. And I looked across the bullpen, and we had a young guy that, it wasn't Attorney Hardy, somebody he had working with us was our attorney. He was in the bullpen. I said, what you doing in here? He said, I got so caught up in your speech, I just had to go. I said, well, then who gonna get us out of here? Everybody got a lane to play. Stay in your lane. And that's what Mark and I have done. We're working on tech centers together, National Urban League, National Action Network. We already have a 30,000 square foot tech center in Newark under National Action Network. They don't put that in the paper. You not see one article. Operating for 2 years, 30,000 square feet every day, training young people, National Action Network, open night and day, Reverend Steffi Bartlett, have a lab in Harlem. We can really expand that and do some, one in City Urban League, one City NAN, because we are with this digital divide. Our community is not brought up to par. We used to have library by bus, we have tech by bus, we have NAN tech buses that we bring right in the hood. If our children are not literate with technology, they cannot survive in this new economy. That is mandatory. So we've got to be able to do social service and social justice at the same time. Another partner on measuring the movement, what they're doing, and I want you to take all these in our action sessions as we start, because people talk about their organizations ain't doing nothing. Well, Mark told you specifically what the Urban League is doing. And I want y'all to go back to your cities. Urban League's doing this, NAN's doing this. You know about the tech center, you know about what we're doing census. We gotta go back with action spots. Because usually the folks telling you there ain't nobody doing nothing is because they're not involved in anything, so they wouldn't know anyway. People call my radio show, ain't nobody doing nothing. What are you a member of? Nothing. What, and how do you know? President and CEO of the Lawyers Committee. I'm going to go to Lawyers Committee next. Let's go to Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. This sister has worked in the Justice Department, and I can tell you she has worked diligently on many of the concerns and cases that we have been concerned about. Because there's press in the room, I won't go into details, but I will say she never violated the trust of the Justice Department. Ain't no bar in her. I said that, she didn't. But she has always let us know she's going to stand up for what is right. And when she took Wade Henderson's seat, she has been just as committed, just as passionate. Let us hear from Vanita Gupta.
Good morning. I am so honored, and I think we should give Reverend Sharpton another round of applause for his leadership. Thank you. Reverend Sharpton has been leading us for decades, and Van is right that we owe him so much, because through thick and thin, regardless of whatever political administration was in Washington, he was the moral compass and served as a moral center. Oh.
We put on the woman and you turn off the sound.
That's okay. No woman's ever silenced at the podium. Hey, we're all in it together, and I want to thank my dear friends, Kristen and Janice and Mark and Van. We have been fighting for justice for a long time. There is no question that right now is some of the most perilous times for all of us in this country. But we also need to remember that the peril didn't start with Donald Trump. And I want to remember my first case when I started out at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, which my sister Sherilyn Eiffel now runs. I was representing 46 men and women who had been wrongfully arrested in the town of Tulia, Texas, located between Lubbock and Amarillo in the Panhandle. 40 of whom are African American, the remaining 6 white or Hispanic, who were having romantic relationships with African Americans. There was a drug sting on July 23rd, 1999, where the sheriff called out the local TV station cameras to plant themselves in front of a jail. There was a militarized SWAT team that arrested everyone at 4 and 5 a.m., ran them in front of the local jail. The local paper, the Tulia Herald, just hours later, prints a headline that says, "Tulia streets cleared of garbage," and printed the names and addresses and charges of all the 46 men and women who had been arrested on the uncorroborated word of an undercover narcotics informant by the name of Tom Coleman. It turned out that he himself had been arrested for theft and abuse of official capacity during the 18 months that he was conducting this drug sting in Tulia. He had charged all 46 of either one or multiple counts of between 1 and 4 grams of powder cocaine. And by the time I got involved in these cases, which was 2 years in, folks were sitting in prison, fanned out all over the state of Texas on sentences ranging from 20 to 40, 45, 60, 99, and in one case, 341 years in Texas prisons. So don't forget that this peril and the moment that we find ourselves in didn't just start with this president. This is a long history that now we have to reverse. And I talk about this too, Van, because I think it's important that we recognize that the buildup of mass incarceration happened on Democrats and Republicans' watch. And we are not going to get ourselves out of this hole overnight. But it is going to take sheer persistence and focus of vision on what we need to do to make this right to end mass incarceration once and for all in this country. And I know that with all of you, we can get it done. I walked into the Justice Department as President Obama's chief of the Civil Rights Division just weeks after Michael Brown had been killed in the streets of Ferguson, and we overtook the investigation of the Ferguson Police Department. And every week that I was on that job, there was at least one video of viral police violence that was before us as we were sitting and trying to make difference and bring justice in these communities. And the reality is that we were, because of the movement for Black Lives, finally, again, we do this in cycles. I think it's like every 20 years where we actually start to really focus on racial justice and policing and public safety. Well, we were in that moment, and largely due to the movement for Black Lives, to young people marching in cities all over America asking for justice. But I got to tell you, we did everything we can. I was working for 2 attorneys general and a president who were leading as far forward into civil rights as they possibly could in the last 2.5 years of President Obama's administration. It never felt like enough. It wasn't enough. We had laws that weren't able to reach everything that we needed to reach. But the reality is that it went from that to me feeling an extreme sense of whiplash in 2016 and 2017. With an attorney general like Jeff Sessions, who called the Voting Rights Act intrusive, who reversed Attorney General Eric Holder's Smart on Crime memo, trying to change the way that mandatory minimums are influenced by federal prosecutors, reversed the memo that we had issued to state court judges on fines and fees, saying stop using the criminal justice system to get money off of the backs of Black and brown folks, the most vulnerable in these communities, as had been done in Ferguson. He reversed everything that we had done, practically. It was like a checklist of all the stuff that we were trying to do at the Civil Rights Division at that time. There has not been a single Section 2 voting rights case that this Justice Department has brought in under President Trump. Just think about it and think about what we saw in 2018, what Stacey Abrams went through, what Andrew Gillum saw, what was happening all over the country, not a single Section 2 voting rights case. So it's been a sense of whiplash. But I remember, even on my darkest days, that despair is the enemy of justice. And that this work has never, ever been easy. It has always been uphill. And I think that it really sometimes takes a crisis to center one's mind. And frankly, to not take things for granted that we may have taken for granted for too long. And so we have to work at this. And I am proud, in June of 2017, I joined the Leadership Conference, an organization I had worked with when I was at the Legal Defense Fund, when I was at the ACLU, when I was in the government. It's an organization founded in 1950 by Jewish, African American, and labor leaders, out of the notion that the fight for civil rights couldn't be won by one group alone, but would need to be waged in coalition. The fight for civil rights cannot be won by one group alone, but needs to be waged in coalition. And that's why when I work with the leaders here on every side of this table and with all of you, we know we have to band together. This isn't a fight for one community. This is inherently a fight about everything that we stand for right now. We are in the fight to save the soul of our country at this very minute, and we need all hands on deck. And I want to just go into a couple of specific policy issues, building on a couple of things that Mark mentioned. The census. I'm going to double down. Why do we care about the census? We care because $800 billion of federal money is going to get allocated to all of our communities based on the census. We care about the census because all of the districts that get carved up around the country that create representation in the House of Representatives and Congress is based on the census. We care about the census because redistricting at the state level, how political power gets carved up in this country, is based on the census. And when Steve Bannon added that citizenship question, he lobbied the Commerce Department to have the citizenship question added. He knows that if there is a systematic undercount of black and brown communities, it will radically change the way political power exists in this country, and we will not let that happen. We cannot let that happen. We're going to need organizers. We've got 1 year, April 1st, 2020. We're going to need organizers in every community, faith leaders, business leaders, everyone to be engaged in the fight to save the census and to make sure that every single one of us is counted. We also know in the voting and voting rights, this is a big mess. I'm going to tell you right now that voter suppression efforts are alive and well. And in the most recent election, the Leadership Conference, working with Lawyers Committee and several other organizations, we were busy, hard at work. Lawyers Committee has been doing some really important litigation around the country to protect voter rights. We were involved with local election officials. We had to correct an official state mailer that had wrong information, deliberately wrong information, about felony disenfranchisement rules that was about to go out to 1.5 million people in Arizona, and we had to correct that just because we were on the ground in the states working with local election officials. There are voters getting purged off the rolls who don't even know that they've been purged, and they're showing up on election day hoping to vote and then being told that they've been purged off the rolls. We contacted 400,000 voters in Ohio that were at risk of being purged to say, you've got to re-register, check your registration. We did that in Georgia. All over the country, this work has to go hand in hand with the work that we need to do to make sure everyone's counted, and then 6 months later is voting and is having their vote be able to be counted in the election of great consequence in 2020. There's so much work that we have to do. I want to talk about the courts. This is a topic that we don't talk about enough. And in the civil rights movement, we know the importance that the courts have played in setting historic wrongs right. We have nominees right now that are being proposed by this president who are literally appearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee refusing to say that Brown versus Board of Education was correctly decided. I'm not kidding. Even Justice Gorsuch, when he was first confirmed, at least said, yes, Brown versus Board of Education was correctly decided. But over the last 2 years, we've got more and more nominees changing what the center is on this. More and more that are appearing in the Judiciary Committee refusing to answer that question. We have been asleep at the switch on the courts, and I'm going to own it too. Progressives have taken for granted the fact that our courts are going to protect themselves. They are not. There is a strong opposition on the other side right now that has been working on this for 30 and 40 years. And every issue that we care about, from criminal justice reform, to voting rights, to the census, to healthcare, education for our kids, every issue that we care about is playing itself out in the courts. President Trump now has confirmed 1 in 5 judges in the first 2 years of his administration is now a Trump nominee confirmed. These are some of the most extreme judges that we have seen in decades in this country, and our kids are going to bear the price. We need to make sure that when presidential candidates come before NAN, when they speak on any issue related to civil rights, that we are asking them about what they're going to do to protect the courts, to make sure that people, men and women who understand the importance of civil rights are going to be occupying the bench. These are lifetime appointments, and we've got to get more active in that fight. And then let me just say in closing that we also have to understand that this administration is trying to divide us. They're trying to do it on a whole host of fronts. They're demonizing immigrants, hoping that other communities of color are going to hate immigrants. They're demonizing, they're fomenting a lot of division between Jewish and African American groups. This will be our peril. And we need to make sure, and this goes back to the heart of what the Leadership Conference is about, that we are operating together in coalition with each other, understanding that they cannot divide us, that what's happening right now is not a fight for one community, it is an attack on justice and inclusion and fairness and opportunity for all of our communities. We are in the fight of our lives. And so we've got to be in this together, and we need to organize. There is nothing that's going to get us out of this unless we organize, unless we vote, unless we knock on doors to make sure all of our people are counted. Because I'm going to just close on this, which is that we cannot win if we don't fight, and if we don't fight together. Thank you.
Vanita Gupta. Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, and you heard a breakdown of what they're doing. We end every year, the last day, measuring the movement, what everybody's doing, where we're projecting that we must go. And I really like her emphasis on coalition. One of the things that we've tried to do at NAN and will continue to do, despite some criticism, is work across all lines with everybody. Let me tell you something. If you are so insecure about who you are that you can't work with others that are different than you, then you don't have black pride, you have black insecurity. I can work with anybody else and still not be a threat to my self-affirmation of my blackness. If I got to stay only in the room with black folk, that means I can't be trusted outside the room because I really got some insecurities. That's like, man, you got to try to keep your wife from going out because you're afraid she'll go out with somebody. There's something wrong with you, not her. We've got to work with everybody. Latinos, Jews, Arabs, everybody. Because none of us can deal with this situation alone. And let's be honest, there were some whites that went in the South and marched and died and went to jail. Goodman, Cheney, and swearing to 2 Jews and a black, while some black folk was down there talking about what is Dr. King marching for. Don't act like all of us did this by ourselves. And don't act like everybody was in the movement. We never Million Man March till '95. Martin Luther King never had 1 million people at a march. Everybody afterward talk about back in the civil rights days, they were not in them. I meet folks everywhere I go. Well, Mal, I voted for you. If that was true, we'd be having this meeting in the East Room of the White House. So we need those coalitions that Vanita's talking about. A sister beloved that worked in New York State on these issues way before she reached her national notoriety of dealing with criminal justice, which is a very dominant issue in our community nationwide and needs methodical and strategic moves in order to deal with it, as Van said this morning. Let us bring from the Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights Under the Law, Kristen Clark.
Good morning. Good morning. You know, I'm born and bred in Brooklyn, New York, and I grew up listening to this one, the good Reverend Sharpton. We are so blessed and honored for your decades of leadership, Reverend. Thank you so much for having me. And it's an honor to be fighting the wars that are underway across our country in the trenches right now with the folks up here on this dais and frankly with all of you in this room. You all have showed up and showed out, and it takes a village, and together we will overcome the turbulent times that we are up against today. So thank you for being here. And I want to start off by giving a warm shout out to my Shiro, Gwen Carr. Gwen and her family have been done a grave injustice. For several years now, our Justice Department has sat on the results of its investigation into the choking death of Eric Garner. And every day she stands up proud, head held high, fighting and using her voice to speak out against police shootings and the crisis that we face in our country. And I want you to know that we stand with you, Gwen. And shortly after Attorney General Jeff Sessions, now gone, took office, Reverend Sharpton and I and several others met with him to let him know that we were going to hold his feet to the fire, that we would be watching him at every turn. And I remember that Reverend Sharpton brought up one critical issue. He looked Mr. Sessions in the eye and said, "We want the results of that investigation." And he said, I didn't know much about that, but I'm going to get back to you. And he never did. And so we're going to go back to the Justice Department again, Gwen, and tell Mr. Barr that we want justice. We want justice. And it's not just for Eric Garner, it's for Tamir Rice and Michael Brown and Walter Scott and Laquan McDonald and Sandra Bland and Amadou Diallo and Sean Bell and Akai Gurley and Stephon Clark, Alton Sterling, Freddie Gray. We could go on all day. Too much. It's been too long and too much. So Gwen, thank you. You inspire me, and we're going to keep fighting. Now, these are dark and turbulent times. I want to take a moment to talk about the hate that's festering across our country right now. And, you know, the latest FBI statistics show that hate crimes are up 17%, and it's not shocking given the rhetoric and the actions, frankly, that we see from this White House. And, you know, when I think about hate and where it comes from, right, it comes from people modeling behavior that they see from national leaders. But we have to also remember that where bigots congregate, it's not at the corner at the Starbucks, right? So much of the hate that we see today starts online. And so one of the issues that we're fighting at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under law right now is the hate crime crisis and the rise of white supremacy that we're seeing across the country today. And I want to share a victory that we secured recently in partnership with other groups that have been fighting this against Facebook. Interesting, Facebook maintained a policy that said white supremacist postings and activity are banned. But in their view, white nationalist and white separatist activity was okay. Let me say that again. White supremacy bad, white nationalism, white separatism okay. This from a $50 billion corporation. So we had to tell them that, one, you need more diversity around your table because your policies don't make sense. Two, all of these things are one in the same. And three, people are dying. People are going to these platforms, and this is where they're organizing the Charlottesville hate rally. This is where they're doxing people and publishing people's personal information online and directing people to go out and target and harass people. This is where they're broadcasting hate, like what we saw in Christchurch, New Zealand. And so last week, Facebook abandoned this ridiculous policy following the pressure from our group and other organizations. We will keep using our voice, and we will keep fighting. But the rise of white supremacy is not something that we can ignore today. And I want to talk a little bit about an issue that Vanita talked about, and that is a crisis that we face with how we're treating immigrant communities in our country and struggling families that are seeking a safe haven in our country. But I think it's important to remember that when we talk about the immigration crisis, that we're talking about brown and black people, people that look like us in this room. I want to ask by a show of hands, raise your hand if you're a first-generation American. Raise your hand if you have an immigrant who lives in your house. And this is an issue that impacts all of us. And, you know, I think it's important that as we talk about the struggles that we're up against, we also talk about the victories, because there are some victories happening. Last year, President Trump announced a policy, another policy that he was getting rid of that benefited 4,000 Liberian Americans who've been in our country for decades, contributing peacefully to their communities and their economies. A program called DED, Deferred Enforced Departure. He said he was ending it. And he did this shortly after making those horrendous comments inside the White House. I'm not going to repeat the words here, talking disgracefully about African nations and Haiti, making clear the racial animus that he harbors towards these groups. He ended DED, and last week, Sunday, 4,000 Liberians, many who live right here in New York City, faced deportation. We filed suit against President Trump, a case that nobody else wanted to bring, and said that this is unlawful, it's discriminatory, it violates the Constitution. And at 3 hours before our emergency hearing with the court, President Trump signed an order granting a 1-year extension on that program, 1 year of relief that gives us 1 year to keep fighting for folks who deserve to stay in this country. So we are winning some victories, but Vanita is right, the courts are under attack. Trump has been merciless in appointing a slate of radical extremists, mostly white men, to the courts at every turn, And let me tell you about some of them. One of them is a guy named Brent Talley. This is a guy who openly blogged support for the KKK. Another who said that transgender children are Satan's children. Another guy named Thomas Farr, who is the poster child of voter suppression efforts in North Carolina. Whenever there's an ugly voter suppression effort in North Carolina, it doesn't matter if it dates back to Jesse Helms or dates back today, the hired gun lawyer for defending voter suppression is Thomas Farr. These are the white men that Trump is seeking to stack on our federal courts, and it's important that we speak out about this. He is hijacking the courts. You know, he won't be in the White House forever, but these judgeships are for a lifetime, And these are judges who are putting in place precedents that will be there for decades that touch on everything from voting rights to education to criminal justice, you name it. So it's important that we pay attention, that we speak out. It's been hard to win and beat back a lot of these nominees, but every now and then we have gotten a victory, and we were able to beat back the voter suppression defender in North Carolina. Thomas Farr's nomination went down. And sadly, there are many more in the pipeline. Now, voter suppression indeed is rampant across the country, and you've heard lots about this, and we have important work to do right now. At the 11th hour, on the heels of the 2020 election cycle, no doubt this will be when officials work to eliminate polling sites. They'll make it harder for people to register to vote. They're going to say, we want photo ID. We want people to give copies of birth certificates before we'll add you to the registration rolls. They're going to put every hurdle and obstacle in your path possible to make it harder for you to vote. But together we can win. We can use the courts to push back. We can show up at the hearings and say, we're watching. We're watching. In Randolph County, Georgia, they sought to gut 9 of 11 polling sites. This absolutely would have made it harder to vote. We went down there with our lawsuit in hand and said, if you go through with this morning, we'll see you in court this afternoon. And they abandoned the plan. They abandoned the plan because the churches rallied and showed up. The lawyers rallied right behind them. So together we can win. I want to ask you to pull out your phones right now or take out your pen. We run a program at the Lawyers Committee. It's been going about 2 decades now. It's called Election Protection. It's the nation's largest and longest running nonpartisan voter protection program. The number is 866-OUR-VOTE. 866-OUR-VOTE, 866-687-8683. If you see, hear, smell voter suppression efforts happening in your country, we need you to speak up. We need you to report it so that we can work together with you to fight back and beat back these ugly efforts that will be relentless from now through 2020 to make it harder for us to vote. 866-687-6863. This program is in effect in all 50 states. It doesn't matter what you look like or who you vote for. Our goal is singular, making sure that everyone can vote and have their voice heard. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is education. I know that many of you heard about this recent higher ed scandal. You know, it's really interesting. One of the things that we fight for at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law is educational equity, making sure that all of us have a chance and have a shot. And so it is remarkable when you think about our higher ed system and legacy admissions that already bake in so much privilege and preference for wealthy white people. But now you have wealthy white people who are openly bribing coaches, paying people to take the SAT for their kid, creating false profiles, suggesting that their kids are elite athletes in order to really steal seats at colleges and universities. They need to be held accountable to the fullest extent under the law. You know, I think about this woman, Lori Loughlin, one of the actresses from The Full House. The Full House. It'd be interesting to see if they snatched that off the TV as quickly as they did The Cosby Show. She paid $500,000 to have her 2 daughters listed as recruits for crew. I don't think any of them can swim. Now, down the street, right here in New York City, we have one of the most racially segregated public school systems in the country. And the crisis happening with our New York City specialized high schools cannot be ignored. When I was coming up in New York City, aspiring to go to Brooklyn Tech or Stuyvesant, Bronx Science, that was something you could actually seek to achieve to do. In 1980, Stuyvesant took 212 black students. This year, they took 7. We need to speak up. We need to hold our election officials accountable. We need to understand why Mayor de Blasio has not been successful in rectifying the crisis that infects the New York City public education system, one of the most broken public education systems in the country. And we also need to fight these efforts to make our college and university campuses whiter. Right now, there are 2 cases quietly moving through the courts, one challenging affirmative action at Harvard University and another challenging affirmative action at the University of North Carolina. We're involved in both of these cases. They're on a fast track to the Supreme Court. We've got to pay attention. While rich, white, wealthy people buy seats at schools, they keep attacking affirmative action, attacking efforts to just ensure that some of us have access to opportunity through these schools. We've got to speak up and speak out. You know, 51 years after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King, I'm reminded that we all have work to do to keep his legacy alive. We all have work to do to keep his legacy alive. I invite all of you in this room to partner with us. We are not doing this work alone, to partner with us in the important work underway right now to save our democracy and to beat back all the racism and white supremacy that we are up against. Thank you so much.
Lastly on the panel, and let me give you the rundown how we do measure the movement, our closing day. We're going to hear our last civil rights leader, Derek Johnson, the president of NAACP, could not be with us. He had a long scheduled trip after the Image Awards, but they are part of our family. Then I'm going to open up the floor for a half hour so you can ask questions or make statements. Notice the speakers up here, you're not speaking, you're not keynoting. You're asking a question or making a brief statement. And we're cutting it off in a half hour, and then our youth are going to cut the ribbon and start their youth. Their food panel will be in Whole Food panel. Dominique Johnson of Huddle will do that at 1 o'clock in Empire East. And in Empire West, Attorney Hardy will be with gun talk and police policies. Is that right? In Empire West. And then 2 o'clock, dismantling injustice. And then, of course, this evening, our young folks' fashion show. So that's what we're going to do. We want to hear your questions and thoughts right after the next speaker as we tie all of this. As you know, we issue 10 days after the close of the day the action points that come out of all these workshops. We did a whole thing on pension funds yesterday, many areas that we're coming out. This is our agenda for the year to come. I saw several recognize Gwen Carr, mother of Eric Garner, the victim of police chokehold. Stand up, Gwen. I want you to know, Gwen has been to every rally, every Saturday rally. We rally here Saturday mornings on the air. at the House of Justice for the last 28 years since there's been a Nan. She's not at the rally, she's on the road speaking somewhere. And you heard me refer to the Central Park Five, where these 5 young men were wrongfully accused of the brutal rape and beating of a white female in Central Park. We stood up for them, and they were convicted after being coerced, went to jail, one for 15 years. And when he got out, where do you go with a rape conviction? And we had fought for them, his mother and he came to me. He worked for 3.5 years at Nan. He couldn't have a job. We gave him a job. And he's been there every Saturday ever since. Stand up, Carrie Weiss, one of the Central Park Five. And one of the great sessions that we never had done in this year's convention was Daughters of the Movement, where we had the young ladies that were the daughters or granddaughters of civil rights leaders, talked about what it was growing up in a household of activism. And one of them we were honored to have, my daughter Dominique, chaired it. And one who has always been a part of our National Action Network family and the global family is the daughter of Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz. Malak, stand up. Malak Shabazz. She is around with all of the activism so a lot of folk don't know she's Dr. Betty and Malcolm X's daughter. And she'll tell you quick, Dr. Betty and Malcolm. I had a mother and a father. I didn't have just a father. She'll get you real straight on that real quick. And I know her mother well. Mother is Dominique and Ashley's godmother. And you would say, how you doing, Sister Betty? That's Dr. Shabazz. I earned my degree. So she got it honest. That let's clarify who we are. This sister grew up in the movement. She has been an activist extraordinaire all of her life. Her father was Reverend Jackson's coach, and she has been his other coach. One of the few people that could question him and know how to get him to think of something a different way. Those of us that grew up under his tutelage, if we could not out-argue him, which was next to impossible, we would go and call Janice, and she would have a way of talking to him, but in her own activism and her own growth. She now sits in the seat of Dorothy Height. And Dorothy Height was one of our staunch, stalwart leaders who sat in the seat of Dr. Mary Cloud Bethune. Movements have continuity. One of the things I don't trust is folk that don't have some roots somewhere. My mother used to tell me that when she was growing up in the South, first thing they'd ask when you start dating somebody, they would say, courting, is who is your folks? If don't nobody know where you come from, it take a long time for me to warm up to you. Because if you all that, somebody should know who you are. We know her, she's flesh of our flesh, blood of our blood. Let us hear as she now heads the organization, National Council of Negro Women, sitting in the seat of Dorothy Height, our own Janice Mathis.
Good morning. Reverend Sharpton, that was a very sweet and kind and generous introduction, and I appreciate it. You know, Reverend Al has roots, some of you know, in South Carolina, just like Reverend Jackson and I and Jesse Jr. do. And what I say about South Carolina, the state that started the Civil War, Fort Sumter was in South Carolina. Only militia that ever fired on a federal fort were the South Carolinians. If you can get out, you can do well, but the getting out is the hard part. If you can get out of South Carolina, Van. I want to thank these illustrious panelists, Kristen and Vanita, and the godfather of civil rights, Mark Morial, Van Jones, for making us proud every time we see you on CNN. I mean, just, and you know, if you want to flirt around with the Republicans, you know what I tell Negroes who want to do that? Just bring us something back. Don't go over there and get comfortable. Go over there and remember, like the Hebrew boys, who you are, and you do that with integrity, Van. So I can be with you on that. Because after all, we don't have any permanent friends. It's all about permanent issues and the things that we need to do for our community. There's so much going on that it's easy to sort of get lost in the day-to-day. I watch Rachel and I watch Cuomo and I get all, but then I have to step back a step and kind of put this thing in context. If Trump knew who he was fighting, he'd leave us alone. Because if 1619 to 1919 has taught us anything, is that we're on the winning end of this proposition. And so when I think about National Council of Negro Women, it is daunting to sit in Dorothy Height's seat. There's not going to be another Dorothy Height. But each and every day, Vanita, we are challenged, Jesse, to be the best Jesse we can be, to be the best Janice we can be, and remember on whose shoulders we are standing. A lot of what we are seeing now in context, we used to believe in majority rule. One person, one vote. Majority rule. Whoever gets the most votes, that's who the winner is, and that's who gets to run the country next. But when the majority start looking different, the majority start looking, you know, not as homogeneous as it used to look. It started looking more variable. Start looking like this room looks, red, yellow, black, and white. They all precious in God's sight. Then we somehow start losing our love affair with majority rule. And so we shave a few points with a little voter suppression. We undercount a little bit on the census. We start messing with the redistricting so you can have a minority of the votes and a majority of the members of Congress. We start treating money like it's speech. So the more money you got, the louder your voice is. And you know, we black people, we kind of look at that and say, well, you know, we ain't really worried about campaign finance reform. We don't give no money that much to campaigns. Don't sleep through money as speech. That is a radical notion. Speech is speech. And when you start treating, you're on your way to oligarchy when you start treating money like speech. You're on your way to fascism when you start treating money like speech. You can get an education if you can buy it. You can get health care if you can buy it. You can get democracy if you can buy it. Step back a step and realize what time it is. Democracy is in peril. This ain't so much about us and white folk or us and Trump as it is versus us and totalitarianism. And so, we need not be afraid. We're on the winning side of this proposition. I would be remiss if I didn't say something about National Coalition, NCNW. So let me say that we believe we got this elegant legacy. Bethune will get a statue in the Capitol next year as one of 2 representatives of the state of Florida voted on by the Florida legislature. She will be replacing a Confederate general in Statuary Hall. That's what winning looks like. We're on the winning end of this proposition. Of course, now the Florida legislature wouldn't pay for the statue, so some of us had to help raise $400,000 to get the statue done. But the marble for the statue is only God could arrange it. Puerto Rican woman is carving the statue out of marble quarried from the same quarry where Michelangelo got the material for the Pieta, as only God could arrange it. Next year, NCNW will be 85 years old. We almost as old as the Urban League, almost. We were founded not to be cute and have parties and wear hats. We were founded to fight lynching. Every day there was a lynching, they wore black armbands. Founded to fight. What's the difference between lynching and Black Lives Matter? Nothing. Nothing. NCNW today has 290 chapters, 32 national affiliates, including the AME missionaries, the AME Zion, the Deltas, the AKAs, the Continental Society, the top ladies of distinction. 2.5 million black women. When I got there in 2016, NCNW kind of felt like a tomb. Dorothy had died. Bills wasn't getting paid. Place was dusty, full of cobwebs. The glory days seemed like they were in the past. God's always got a ram in the bush. Yes. He sent Trump to enliven and inspire and motivate us. And so we decided we would wake up and that these dead bones would live. And so we added 6,000 new members in the last 2 years. And it's not because of me. Ingrid Jones and Janetta Cole and some of the most able, Alexis Herman, some of the most able black women in this country decided, no, we're going to make it live, because right now we need a National Council of Negro Women. And what's the first thing we worked on? I never sat in so many rooms full of, I forgot you could be the only black person in a room full of white folk until I was going to the hearings on clean water for Flint. And we said, because, you know, we don't want to do appropriations. That's kind of dry stuff, kind of tired. Clean water for Flint. And what does NCNW have? We got troops on the ground. We got 2.5 million. When they got to calling Mitch McConnell and calling, because most of us, you know, some of us live in districts that are not represented by the CBC. Congressional Black Caucus don't represent those of you who live in the suburbs out in Westchester County and some of them other places. So you got to learn to talk to some other folk if you're going to talk to the people who represent you. For the future, we've got this elegant legacy, but what I came here to say to you today, we can't rest on our laurels and talk about legacy. We can't let an administration cut taxes and pay for it with a food stamp cut. So we have to go down there and speak truth to power about why SNAP makes sense for all of us. You can't have a child tax credit and only give it to the wealthiest folk in the country. We've served some 30,000 black women who are trying to start or grow their businesses. But you know, the single most popular program that we do is civic engagement. How many times have you heard somebody say they don't teach civics in school no more? And if you don't understand democracy and what makes it work, it makes it hard for you to fight for it. So we put on these webinars once a month or so, and the one that is most popular is the one about how does the government work. People want to know. 500 women on the phone talking about their board of elections and how to influence it. So while we have an elegant legacy, Reverend Al, we can't rest on our laurels. We are fortified by the past, but we got to be focused on the future. Thank you.
Janice Mathis. Many of you remember last March, an unarmed young man was killed by police in Sacramento, California, 300 feet from his grandmother's bed. He was going home. In the backyard, they shot him, said they thought he had a gun, they say. Found out he was shot in the back and the side. And his name is Stephon Clark. The Clark family is with us. And my little brother, Saventi, where's Saventi? Is in the back. We brought them in from Sacramento, California. A lot of people, when I was doing the eulogy, saw the picture where Stevente had come up and just put his arms around me and hugged me throughout the eulogy. And I told people, you don't know the pain someone suffers and how you are dealing with his reaction rather than the police action shows more about you. We came to comfort him, not you. We wasn't posing for photos. He grew up with his brother, looked alike, did everything together, and now those that were hired to serve and protect, kill his brother, you don't know how you would act. And they will never be the same. Gwen never will ever replace her son being in her life. Children are supposed to bury their mamas, not the other way around. Kerry Weiss, those years he spent in jail on Central Park, you can't ever give him that back. If folks talk about, well, they got a settlement, you can't pay somebody for 15 years of their life. Which is why when Nash Action Network gets involved in the case, we stay with the family. Trayvon's family's here. Howard Beach happened 32 years ago. I talk to Ms. Griffith all the time because it becomes a family matter. And if you're not going to deal with the families, then don't deal with the case because they're the ones that've got to carry the burden. All right, let's do a half hour of you at the mics. And again, I'm going to cut you off if you get up here preaching. Give me somebody, you gonna stand there? All right. Tariq gonna help me cut you off. I'm telling you right now. Cause I do a 3-hour national syndicated radio show every day, and I get these radio revolutionaries, Van, that call me. They're on coffee break. Go to the water cooler, call me, talk all this Che Guevara talk, hang up the phone and go get behind their cubicle. Yes, sir, no, sir. But they bad on the radio.
Yes.
All right.
Hallelujah, greetings. I believe that like you said, that coalitions are important. But the Reparations Dream Act, didn't anybody have to study the problem or form a commission? And they got the government to leg up, and the Democratic Party shut the government down to protect the delayed action for childhood arrivals while they ignore the 400 years of in chains arrivals. And so my question is, I've heard more than one time that the soul of this nation is at stake. But my question is, how can we save the souls of this country before, and Reverend, you talked about that yesterday during the Civil War. My question is, this time, should we save the souls of ourselves first before we try to save the souls of the nation this time around?
All right, well, let me answer that. One, they shut the government down to stop an immigration policy that was going on not in the past right then. So they're not comparable. And they still have not been able to get the legislation to stop them from doing that. So that is not so. Second, the way that we are dealing with the issue of reparations is supporting this commission, because there will not be a debate on how we get it if there is a study that is done led by Congresswoman Lee. The fact that we've got it now even in the presidential discussion is something. I remember when Queen Mother Moore and others started it. Nobody ever dreamed it would be at that level. Don't let us get to that level and be complaining and get it back in the margin. Let's make it happen. In terms of should we be saving our soul, yes, we've got to save our souls first to save the nation's soul. You can't save the nation's soul if we haven't saved our own soul. And I think we've got to deal with that. I think you're absolutely right on that, Mother.
Could I
No, wait a
just-
minute. Whoa. You know that. I told y'all now this ain't. I did not stop you. You stopped yourself.
I'll
So that
call
was
in
it.
on the radio.
All right.
And I did get my hug.
Yeah, you
Well,
got-
I did get my hug, but I want another hug.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to hug you. I ain't think about what they doing to Joe Biden. I'm going to hug you.
Good morning. Good morning, panelists. My name is Joe Gonzalez, and so to each panelist, I ask you, should the United States Attorney General's office be an independently elected post?
All right. That's a good question, Joe.
At minimum, it should be independent. And, the one thing that's always been sacred about the Attorney General's office, and we see that under threat every day right now, especially with the handling of the Mueller report, is supposed to be free from influence from the White House. The Attorney General is tasked with enforcing the law fully and fairly and protecting the rights of our most vulnerable Americans. So to answer your question, I'm not sure whether we should make this an elected position and risk politicizing the office further, but at minimum, it should be independent. And we should speak up when we see the independence of the AG not playing out.
Yeah, that's right. And I would just go a step further. I don't think it should be an elected office. I think that it will really harm the ability of the chief lawmaker in the country, if that happens, to be independent. But what we are seeing right now is a president who does not understand that the Justice Department is supposed to be independent and that nobody in this country, including the president, is above the law.
Okay, thank you.
Reverend Shaw, NAN, Los Angeles, and a bunch of other organizations, Citizens Commission on Human Rights. This is for all of you. Anybody can answer this. Why, since we have found, and research is showing, that Ritalin is the same as cocaine, Adderall is the same as meth, and the fact that children from 0 to 5 and pregnant women are being electroshocked in this country, how come we're not having this on the news? It's just this one-sided, everything is mental health, $190 billion being spent in this country on it, but we can't get money for the inner cities and the schools. I just wonder what it takes for us to show the other side, and how do we get people to represent those who are becoming the victims in the children's services and those different organizations. So anybody can answer.
Reverend Shaw from L.A. Anybody want to take that one? Van?
Well, I think it would be good for us to talk. I'm not as informed as I should be. And I think people forget, those of us who work in the media, we know what we know, but we don't know what we don't know. And we have to be humble enough to ask people who are on the front lines a lot more than we do. I will say that CNN is going to broadcast an 8-part documentary series started at the end of this month called The Redemption Project, which I've been blessed to host, where we at least are trying to get restorative justice shown. The show, I talk to people who have done bad stuff, who want to make amends. I talk to the people that they hurt, and I film them talking to each other, trying to come to some kind of reconciliation. We'll try to put that in prime time to show that we have wisdom in our community about how to solve these problems without destroying folks' lives. And if I can be more useful with the platform I have, I want to be. So thank you.
I'm available to any of you. Thank you.
All right, and get this information to us. He's absolutely right. The sister, the last sister in the back, the last one on row. Raise your hand. You the last one. Don't nobody get behind you. So they can come up all they want. It's going in because I'm not going to hold up the youth. So, all right, go ahead.
Good morning, Rev.
Good morning.
To the panel members, thank you. My name is Joseph Selman, community activist, been retired for 20 years. I have a brief statement and 2 questions. I noticed 3 of the panel members spoke of Black Lives Matter. My first question is, are the members in touch with, around the country, the various chapters of Black Lives Matter? My other question is, we know criminal justice is important, but what about health care, HIV? I've been living with HIV for 35 years. I'm able to say that because I have dissipated the stigma. With 35 years, I'm able to stand here in front of everyone and saying I've been living. A longtime member of NAN, former chair of the HIV committee. So those are my questions.
All right, let me answer and then anybody else. One, I think the HIV, obviously, as you said, you were a former chair in New York of our committee. We're committed to dealing with that, and others can speak for the organization. In terms of Black Lives Matter, there are different segments of that. Alicia Garza spoke here yesterday. So the way we deal with it is we deal with the sisters that started Black Lives, because you got several different groups calling themselves Black Lives. So rather than our getting involved in whatever their thing is, because all of us have internal things, we deal with the three sisters that started it. Alicia was here yesterday, last year, Patrice Cullors. I stay right with the folks that started it, so I don't get in the middle of who, whatever, because you can end up in, well, if I come to your house to dinner, I deal with whoever's serving the food. I don't decide who's uncle and who's aunt. Y'all can argue that out in the family meeting. Anybody else got? Come on now, I'm not gonna do that. There's no follow-ups here. Say what you got to say when you got the mic, like I did her.
Thank you very much.
All right, because we got a lot of folk. Most conventions, you don't get to do nothing but dance, eat, whatever. I don't want to say the rest because there's reporters in here.
Good morning to everybody here, and thank you. Thank you all for this wonderful opportunity. My name is Kenneth L. Simmons Sr., and I'm a new member of the National Action Network, of which I am proud and overwhelmed. But what I want to say here specifically today, or at least, and it is a question. It is a question. 19, Red Summer. It meant a lot. I never heard anything about that in school. So we're in 2019 now, 100 years later. What should we be doing? Is there any focus that we should be preparing in addition, and certainly what's going on here? And the final question is, and I haven't heard this, is Britain going to get revenge against the revolution? How what happened here in America was changed from the kingship to a democracy and the three branches of government? And wasn't we warned when we heard candidate Donald Trump say, "I alone can fix this"? And have we addressed that significantly enough yet?
All right, well, one, I think that we've all laid out what we intend to do in 2019. And I think that from 1919 to 2019, we went through various phases. We had a phase now that I think we all know. We've got to deal with voter rights. We've got to deal with criminal justice, including mass incarceration and police reform. We have to deal with health care. So I think everyone explained what they're doing there. In terms of Britain getting revenge on America, they can't even get Brexit right. So I don't know what they're going to do with that. But I think we need to get America right and worry about Britain at another level. Good question, though.
My name is J.E. Franklin, and my question is directed to the Honorable Mark Morial, and it has to do with the 2020 census. Since you were involved with the advisory committee, my question is, what can we do to displace the word race with the word ethnicity on the census?
Good question.
It's an important question, and when you look at if you recall the 2010 form,
I had it.
It allowed people to both choose a race in some areas and also choose a nationality. So in other words, you could say that you were of Latino descent, but that you were Mexican or Puerto Rican and the like. We were not successful in 2010, and the Trump administration nixed it, I believe, for 2020, where we sought an opportunity for people to designate themselves as Black and Haitian, or Black and Jamaican, or Black and Ethiopian, or Black and Nigerian. Those are the four largest places of largest homes of the African diaspora in the United States. So this effort, what you see on the form, I think doesn't reflect what many of us would like to see on the form. But that is because the momentum we had, and I was only head of the Census Advisory Committee from 2010 to probably 2009 to 12, is different than what we were seeking had the election gone another way. See, it's important to recognize how much elections count. We were seeking, because what we were faced with is, concurrently, you may have, with the form says Black or African American, you may have people who are of the African diaspora, say they're Ethiopian, who say, well, I don't consider myself Black or African American, I consider myself Ethiopian. So, or Ethiopian American, or Jamaican American, or Nigerian American. So what we were seeking is for people to do a dual designation. We need people to classify themselves as Black for the purposes of reapportionment, for the purposes of political power. So we wanted people to be able to say, I am Black and Ethiopian and Nigerian and Jamaican, or even have a slot that said you could put your nationality, say you were from Cameroon or you were from Barbados. So it's a complicated thing. I will say this again, like so many things, elections matter. So if you look at the Census Advisory Council today and look at the Census Advisory Council under President Obama, it looks different. The people who are advising us, I'm not on it anymore. And I don't even know if I would want to be chairman in this administration unless I had the independence I had to advocate for what we want. So this is going to be what we did. We were not successful this time. We were trying to change the prison gerrymandering rules. We were on the verge of getting the Obama administration to agree to that, then the election came. The prison gerrymandering rules means people who are incarcerated are counted where the jail or the prison is, not where their home is. That suppresses our power. We were, I think, on the verge of getting that changed by the Census Bureau. Then the election took place. They reversed that. The citizenship question emerged. And the census's refusal to go along with our recommendations on how race and ethnicity would indeed be counted. So hopefully that shed some light.
So in light of that answer, because I think it was a great question, should we then be raising that with these candidates, that if we vote for them, that'll be part of what we deal with, what she's raising? I think that's a good, because we have not raised that to the candidates. I think that's very important what you raised. Thank you.
Good morning. Gary Flanoy from Phoenix, Arizona. Thank you guys for everything you do.
From where in Arizona?
Arizona. Yeah, I promised to start that chapter in Arizona.
All
I
right.
haven't done that yet. So I want you to call me out there.
You
But
thought
it's
I
gonna happen.
forgot. As soon as you said it, I said,
Absolutely. We're going to make it happen. So I've been here all week. I've been excited to hear all the great speakers and the conversation. So again, thank you for all you do. Now, one of my biggest concerns is technology. There's a lot of pros, but there's a lot of cons that we don't measure. You know, I think it should be like cigarettes. You come with a warning label, could be hazardous to your health. Now, when we talk about racial profiling, now what about racial profiling in the tech and the social media? You got Facebook doing redlining, UK call them digital gangsters.